It all began on a quiet evening, just like any other. The air was still, the world outside wrapped in a hushed embrace of twilight. But something felt different. A weight lingered in the air, an unshakable presence that pressed against my chest. I tried to ignore it until the call came, a number I didn't recognize, a voice I could barely understand at first. But then, a single phrase cut through the static, freezing me in place. They have a message for you. Someone from your family from the other side. I nearly dropped the phone. My heart pounded as I gripped the device tighter. This had to be a prank, right? A cruel joke? Yet, deep down, I knew better. Because for weeks, I had felt something, an invisible presence watching over me, whispering in the silence, urging me to listen. But listen to what? I had no idea. Body. That night, sleep was a distant dream. My mind replayed the words over and over, searching for meaning. Who was trying to reach me? What was so important that it defied the boundaries of life and death? The answer came in a dream. I found myself in my childhood home, the house my grandfather built with his own hands. Everything looked exactly as it had years ago. The wooden floor creaked beneath my feet as I stepped inside. A faint scent of old books and warm vanilla drifted through the air, just as I remembered. Then I saw him. Sitting by the window, in his favorite armchair, was my grandfather, the man who had raised me, guided me, and loved me more than anyone else ever had. The man who had passed away 5 years ago. My breath hitched. Grandpa. He turned to me, eyes filled with emotion I couldn't quite place. Not sadness, not joy, but urgency. He opened his mouth to speak, but before any words could leave his lips, the entire scene blurred. The walls warped, the light dimmed, and a sudden chill filled the air. And then, just before everything vanished, he whispered a single word. Remember. I woke up a start, gasping for air. My body was drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The dream had felt so real, so vivid. But what was I supposed to remember? I needed answers. The next day, I drove to my grandfather's old house, the place where I had spent so many summers as a child. It had been abandoned for years, but something told me I needed to be there. As I stepped inside, a wave of nostalgia crashed over me. Dust blanketed the furniture. The scent of age was lingering in the air. I wandered through the rooms, running my fingers over old photo frames, memories flooding back with each step. Then I reached the study. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating the old wooden desk in the center of the room. And on that desk, as if waiting for me all these years, lay an envelope. My hands trembled as I picked it up. My name was written on the front, in familiar handwriting, my grandfather's handwriting. Swallowing hard, I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter inside. The words on the paper sent a shiver down my spine. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in time. There's something important you must know. Something that could change everything. My breath caught in my throat. The letter continued, revealing secrets I had never known. Choices he had made, sacrifices he had kept hidden. And at the very end, a final warning. There's still time, but you must act now. Follow the path I left for you, and whatever you do, don't ignore the signs. At that moment, a cold gust of wind rushed through the room, knocking over a picture frame. As I picked it up, my eyes widened. Behind the glass, tucked behind the photo, was a small key, a key I had never seen before. Conclusion. I knew then that this was only the beginning. My grandfather had tried to reach me from beyond the grave, desperate to pass on a message that he hadn't been able to deliver in life. But why now? What was I supposed to find? One thing was certain, I couldn't turn back now. The truth was waiting for me, buried in the past. And I was going to find it, no matter what. The small key felt cold in my palm, heavier than it should have been. As I stared at it, a strange sensation crept over me, like I was holding something sacred, something meant to remain hidden until the right moment. And that moment had finally arrived. But what did it unlock? My grandfather's letter had warned me. There is still time, but you must act now. Time for what? And why had he kept this secret buried for so long? There was only one way to find out. I had to follow the path he left for me. Body, with the letter still in my hands and the key in my pocket. I took a deep breath and looked around the study. My grandfather's presence was everywhere. The scent of old books, the soft creak of the wooden floors, the faint trace of his pipe smoke still lingering after all these years. I knew this room well. I had spent countless afternoons here as a child, listening to his stories, running my fingers over the leather-bound books on the shelves. But I had never noticed a lock. My gaze swept the room, searching for anything that seemed out of place. And then, near the bookshelf, I saw it, an old wooden chest half hidden beneath a dust-covered sheet. My heart pounded as I pulled the sheet away. The chest was sturdy, its brass hinges slightly rusted with time. And right in the center, just beneath the carved initials J.M., my grandfather's initials, was a small keyhole. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the lock turned. I hesitated, fear and excitement battling inside me. And then I lifted the lid. Inside the chest lay a collection of old documents, letters, and, at the very top, a faded black and white photograph. I picked it up carefully, dusting off the surface. It was a picture of my grandfather, much younger, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. She had soft, kind eyes and a gentle smile. But what sent a chill down my spine was a date scribbled on the back, 1952. This photograph was taken years before my grandfather had ever met my grandmother. My breath caught. Who was she? And why had my grandfather kept this hidden? I dug deeper, scanning the letters beneath the photograph. Most were worn with age, the ink slightly faded. But as I unfolded one of them, my hands shook. My dearest James, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I wish things had been different. I wish we had more time. But know this, you are my greatest love, and I will always watch over you. Please, if you ever have a son or a daughter, tell them the truth. Tell them where they come from. Tell them who they are meant to be. With all my heart. Eleanor. The letter slipped from my fingers. Eleanor, a name I had never heard before. A woman I had never known. And yet, she had written this letter to my grandfather, pleading for him to tell someone the truth. But he never had, and now, years later, it had fallen into my hands. I felt dizzy, my mind racing with questions. If Eleanor was my grandfather's love before my grandmother, then what had happened to her? Why had my grandfather kept her existence a secret? And more importantly, what truth had he been too afraid to share? Suddenly, the room felt colder. The light outside had dimmed, shadows stretching across the walls. A strange sensation prickled my skin, like I wasn't alone. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A movement. A flicker of something just beyond my vision. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing by the doorway, was a figure. A woman. Her features were blurred, her presence almost translucent, but her eyes, soft, familiar, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart stop. She didn't speak. She didn't move. But in that moment, I knew. Eleanor. She was here, watching, waiting, for me to understand. Conclusion. I blinked, and just like that, she was gone. But the message was clear. This wasn't just about my grandfather. This was about me, about who I was, about the truth he had tried to take to his grave. And now, it was up to me to uncover the rest. Because someone from my family, someone from the other side, had been waiting all these years to tell me something serious. And I was finally ready to listen. The silence in the room felt deafening. The old wooden chest lay open before me, its secrets spilling out like whispers from the past. My hand shook as I gripped Eleanor's letter, her words burning into my mind. Tell them the truth. Tell them where they come from. Tell them who they are meant to be. But what truth? What had my grandfather hidden all these years? And why had Eleanor's presence, her ghost, appeared before me, watching, waiting? I knew one thing for certain. This was no coincidence. Someone from my family, someone from beyond, had been trying to reach me, and I was about to find out why. Body. The next morning, I found myself at the town archives. I had never been here before, but something told me the answers lay hidden within these walls. I walked up to the front desk, my heart pounding. "I need to find records on someone named Eleanor," I said. "From the 1950s. The librarian gave me a curious look, but nodded. "We have old census records and newspapers from that time. You can start there." Minutes later, I was buried in stacks of yellow paper, scrolling through microfilm, searching for anything that could tell me who Eleanor was. And then I found it. A newspaper article from March 10th, 1953. My breath caught in my throat as I read the headline. "Tragic disappearance. Young woman vanishes without a trace." Beneath it was a photograph. The same woman from my grandfather's letter. Eleanor. I scanned the article, my eyes moving frantically over the words. Eleanor Montgomery, 23, was last seen near the outskirts of town on the evening of March 8th. Known for her kind spirit and warm heart, Eleanor's sudden disappearance has left her family devastated. Authorities have found no trace of her whereabouts, and the case remains a mystery. Anyone with information is urged to come forward. I exhaled sharply, my pulse racing. She had disappeared? Without a trace? A sickening thought crept into my mind. Had my grandfather known? Had he been hiding the truth all these years? Not just about Eleanor, but about what had happened to her? I needed more answers. Digging further, I found another document, a birth certificate. My hands trembled as I read the name. Eleanor Montgomery. Mother, unknown. Father, James Miller. James Miller. My grandfather. A wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. Eleanor wasn't just my grandfather's lost love. She was his daughter. The truth revealed. I stumbled out of the archive building, my mind reeling. My grandfather had a child. Before my father, before the life he built with my grandmother. But what had happened to her? Where had she gone? And why had he never spoken of her? That night, I returned to my grandfather's house, desperate for more clues. The moment I stepped inside, a familiar chill ran down my spine. She was here. I could feel it. I stood in the center of the study, gripping Eleanor's letter in my hand. "Eleanor," I whispered, "I know who you are now. I know you were his daughter." A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, knocking over a stack of papers. My heart pounded. She was listening. Trembling, I stepped closer to the desk. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Why did you disappear?" For a moment, there was nothing, just the stillness of the house, the weight of the past pressing down on me. Then, the old radio in the corner flickered to life, crackling with static. A voice, faint and distant, whispered through the speaker. He never knew. I froze. He never knew the truth. My blood ran cold. What truth? What had my grandfather not known? And then, just as quickly as it had started, the radio went silent. I stood there, my heart hammering, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Eleanor hadn't just disappeared. She had been taken. Conclusion. My grandfather had spent his whole life believing Eleanor had vanished. But something darker had happened. And now, from beyond the grave, she was reaching out to me, begging me to uncover what had really happened to her. I wasn't just uncovering family secrets. I was uncovering a mystery that had never been solved. And now, I had to finish what she started, because Eleanor wasn't at peace. Not yet, and she wouldn't be, until the truth finally came to light. The weight of the truth pressed down on me like an anchor. Eleanor wasn't just a lost love. She was my grandfather's daughter, a part of my family, erased from history, buried under decades of silence. And she had been taken. I had no proof, no evidence, just the ghost of a woman who had appeared before me, whispering words that sent chills through my bones. He never knew. But if my grandfather never knew what truly happened to Eleanor, then who did? And why had they kept it a secret all these years? Body. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was spinning with questions, my heart pounding with fear. Eleanor had vanished in 1953, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. But someone had to remember. Someone had to know, and I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I drove to the outskirts of town, to a small, weather house at the end of a lonely road. It belonged to Margaret Lane, the last living person who had known Eleanor before she disappeared. I knocked on the door, my stomach twisting into knots. After a few moments, the door creaked open. An elderly woman peered out, her sharp blue eyes scanning me with suspicion. "You're James Miller's grandson, aren't you?" she said. I stiffened. "Yes," I admitted. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. I knew this day would come. She stepped aside, motioning for me to enter. The inside of her house was cluttered with old newspapers, faded photographs, and the scent of strong tea. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, my hands clammy. "I found Eleanor's letters," I said, "and I saw her." Margaret's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "You saw her?" She appeared to me. "She's been trying to tell me something," I said. "Something my grandfather never knew." Margaret exhaled shakily, closing her eyes. "Then it's time you knew the truth." She reached for a small wooden box on the shelf, opening it with careful hands. Inside were old letters, photographs, and, at the very bottom, a police report. I felt my heart stop. Margaret slid the report toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. "They told everyone she ran away," she said, "but that wasn't the truth." I picked up the report, my fingers trembling, and what I read made my blood run cold. March 8th, 1953, missing person report. Witnesses reported seeing Eleanor Montgomery near the old train station that night. She was last seen speaking to a man. Shortly after, a neighbor heard a struggle. When authorities arrived, there was no trace of Eleanor, no body, no clues, just silence. My vision blurred as I read the final lines of the report. The case was quietly closed due to lack of evidence. No further investigation was conducted. No further investigation? I clenched my fists. They had let her disappear. They had let her story fade away. Who was the man? I asked, my voice shaking. Margaret hesitated, her gaze dark and troubled. "There were rumors," she whispered. "People said she had been meeting someone in secret. Someone powerful. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out." A sharp chill ran through me. "Who?" She took a deep breath, then spoke a name I never expected. A name that shattered everything I thought I knew. The name of someone tied to my family. The darkest secret. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. The man Eleanor had been seen with, the man suspected in her disappearance, was someone connected to my own bloodline. Someone who had lived the rest of his life as if nothing had happened. Someone who had kept this secret buried, thinking no one would ever find out. But now, Eleanor wasn't letting me ignore it. She wanted justice. And I was the only one who could bring the truth to light. Margaret's hand shook as she placed a small envelope in front of me. "This was found near the train station the night she disappeared," she whispered. I opened it carefully, pulling out a faded note. The ink was smudged, but the words were still legible. "Meet me at the station at midnight. No one can know. We have to leave before it's too late." The signature at the bottom was barely visible, but it was enough. Enough to confirm the truth, and enough to change my family's history forever. Conclusion. I drove back home in a daze, my mind racing. My grandfather had spent his life believing Eleanor had simply vanished. But the truth was far darker. She had trusted the wrong person, someone who had promised her safety, only to betray her. And now, even in death, she refused to be forgotten. As I sat in the darkness of my home, Eleanor's presence filled the room once more. A soft whisper brushed against my ear. "You know now." I closed my eyes, my fists clenched. Yes, I knew. And now, there was only one thing left to do. I had to bring the truth to light, no matter what it cost me. The truth was out. Eleanor hadn't simply disappeared. She had been taken, betrayed by someone close, someone powerful. And for decades, the secret had remained buried, hidden beneath silence and fear. But now, the truth lived in me. And the moment I uncovered that final piece, the name of the man responsible, I knew there was no going back. Because Some secrets were never meant to be found. Body. The envelope with Eleanor's final message sat on my desk, the words haunting me. Meet me at the station at midnight. No one can know. We have to leave before it's too late. It was a desperate plea, a warning, and it was addressed to the man who had betrayed her, my great-uncle, a man still alive today, a man who had spent decades hiding behind a mask of kindness, carrying on as if nothing had ever happened, a man who had been there the night she vanished. I stared at his name, my hands shaking. Could it really be him? The quiet, charming elder who had always told stories of our family's past? The one who had helped raise my father, who had always seemed like a pillar of wisdom. It didn't make sense, but deep down I knew. Margaret's words echoed in my mind. She trusted him. Eleanor had trusted him, and he had led her to her fate. Confronting the past, I had two choices: bury the truth, just like everyone else had, or face him, expose him, make him answer for what he had done. The decision was made before I even realized it. That evening, I drove to his house, my heart pounding with every mile. The sun had just begun to set as I pulled into the driveway. His house was old but well-kept, a testament to a life of comfort built on hidden sins. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately, and there he was, my great-uncle, the man I had known my whole life, the man who had smiled at every family gathering, who had shared stories by the fire, who had held me on his lap when I was a child. He looked at me with warm, tired eyes. "Well, now, this is a surprise," he said with a chuckle. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, my hands clenched into fists. This man had walked free for decades, had lived a life of peace while Eleanor's soul had remained trapped in the past, waiting for someone from me to finally listen. No more. I placed the old note on the table. His face changed instantly. The warmth drained from his eyes. His hand trembled as he picked up the paper, staring at the faded ink. Then, after a long moment, he sighed. "So you found it." The calmness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't surprised. He had always known this day would come. "Tell me the truth," I said, my voice low and steady. He looked down, exhaling slowly. "I never meant for things to go the way they did," he said. "She was supposed to leave, to disappear. That was the plan." My blood ran cold. What plan? He hesitated. Then the confession came. Eleanor had been in danger, not just because of him, but because of the family name. She had discovered something about our family's past, a truth that couldn't be allowed to come out. She had tried to run, to escape before it was too late, and he had been sent to stop her. "She wasn't supposed to die," he whispered, his voice thick with something between guilt and exhaustion. "I just had to make sure she never came back." But something had gone wrong. A struggle, a moment of desperation. And in the end, she had vanished. He never said how. He never said where she had gone. And somehow, that made it worse. The final message. I left his house without another word. There was nothing left to say. The truth was uglier than I had ever imagined. Eleanor hadn't just been lost. She had been erased. For the sake of the family name. For the sake of silence. But she had never stopped fighting. Even in death, she had found a way to make her story known. As I stepped into the night, a cold wind brushed against my face. And for the first time in weeks, I felt her presence fade. Not completely. Not forever. But there was peace now. She had been heard. And the past would never be buried again. Conclusion. Some truths come with a price. But silence is even costlier. My family had tried to bury the past. But the dead never stay silent. Eleanor had waited decades to be heard. And now, finally, she could rest. And so could I.